Hi, everybody. I know a lot of people at this conference. I've put on a few of these conferences myself. It's nice that other people are doing it. But I think, was a good idea to let me do what has become a standard presentation because, in a way, somebody who's a science writer, who's got the experience as a journalist, is more concerned with not leaving anything really important out of the story. And some of the other people who are experts leave some really important stuff out. I'm not going to criticize them, but the solution is to put the really important stuff in, right? And I was talking about a period of time when we just started to begin to think about doing an Ibogaine project. And it was a world where there was no Ibogaine, right? All those Ibogaine clinics, all that stuff, nobody knew about it. And actually, the next big drug people were talking about doing after cannabis was cocaine, which now seems incredibly lame, but it led to a situation where it regularized white powders, and there was this thing called heroin chic. And we just said that heroin is not chic. I'm sorry. I'm not down on people who do heroin, but I don't want to have to pay for their heroin. But I don't think that heroin is the future. And there was this idea, it was kind of like the inevitability of communism, right? That inevitably, if you're into pot, you're going to try heroin, and you're going to end up getting strung out, and marijuana leads to heroin. Of course, this meant that people who got addicted to heroin felt that the ultimate person who was the villain in the piece was this guy that was just selling pot. So they would try to steal the pot to pay for the heroin. And that had something to do with the initial thrust to get into Ibogaine. But it took a whole 10 years from December of 1980, when I first gave Howard $1,500, until we got to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And during that time, the problem with hard drugs got much worse because they got rid of the pot. They thought, well, marijuana causes hard drugs, so if we get rid of pot, hard drugs will miraculously vanish. And of course they didn't. What they did was they got rid of the pot, leaving the hard drugs. And they had a very bad crack problem. And we knew that Ibogaine works for cocaine, because that was in the original findings, was not just heroin, but cocaine. He did get a patent for methamphetamine, but there wasn't that much focus on meth right at the moment. And we had a 5-year program from 91 to 95 at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, develop Ibogaine as a treatment for drug dependency. And they, unbeknownst to us, had another drug that was further along, and it was called Suboxone. Now, they had used buprenorphine in India widely instead of methadone, but they had a problem with people diverting the buprenorphine. So they came up with an invention of putting a little bit of naltrexone in the buprenorphine, and they call it Suboxone or Subutex. And what it is you can't shoot it, because if you try to shoot it, the naltrexone preferentially grabs onto the receptor and you go into withdrawal. So they had this thing that you could only basically use sublingually, and it wouldn't go through your mucosa. And they never told us exactly what was happening. We figured it out later. And that was that they had a panel consisting of NIDA scientists and industry representatives. And it had one more industry representative on it, and the industry reps all voted against Ibogaine. But who were the industry representatives? Well, wouldn't it have to be Reckitt Benckiser, which was the biggest one and was already cooperating with NIDA in a joint development called a CRADA agreement? So they put our competition on a board, a panel that voted to end our project. And I think it's very interesting when you start out this presentation with a new slide, which is that they are, not this one, the one right before it. This slide is about Vivitrol and Wellbutrin. So basically, they're putting people on. Hold on a minute. I can't talk right now. Let me call you back.
Give me all your phones.
So what they came up with was the same identical approach to methamphetamine that they already have to opiates, which is Vivitrol is naltrexone. And it's a shot, it's a long-acting naltrexone, but it basically shuts down all your opiate receptors as long as it's in the system and you can't do opiates. The problem with giving this for meth is that even with Wellbutrin, which they had already tried, you only get about 12% efficacy. And with Ibogaine, you're seeing 50% efficacy, even though we don't have the kind of gold standard proof that they have for their thing that basically doesn't work. But they're like kind of fulfilling the original decision that we're not going to go any further than a small group of substances that have been in use for addiction for 50 years. Now, Naltrexone, naloxone, Wellbutrin, Klonopin. So that's it. That's all there is. And next slide. This is our molecule, right? And there are a lot of slides. I picked this one because at the bottom it has methoxychloronaridine. And if you look at the R2 position, you have you have R1, you have Ibogaine has methoxy there, right? Mostly you just have a hydrogen in all these places. But lo and behold, the methoxychloronaridine and the R2 position is this very bulky carboxyl. And this turns out to be very important later. So let's put it this way. It is not as slender as an Ibogaine. It's kind of fat. And it doesn't fit in a lot of places. Next slide. Okay, this slide here, this shows the ventral tegmental axon, which goes from the VTA to the nucleus accumbens and up into the prefrontal cortex. You can think of this as like the spark plug. This is dopamine, and the striatum is right next to it. The striatum kind of tracks the eyes because the eyes have to move as fast as the animal that gets a jolt of dopamine. And dopamine makes animals alert and it makes them aroused. Next slide. Now, it used to be they thought that dopamine is the pleasure switch. This is what Nancy Reagan era pharmacology told people, and it basically laid out a world where you would be completely at the control of the pleasure switch, and you'd have actually no free will. But actually, there's this little known thing about dopamine, what actually kind of gives you free will in a weird way. And what happened was they gave it it was a rat, and they gave the surprise reward, which was juice on the tongue. And you see, the juice on the tongue led to a little spike of dopamine here, right? Because what dopamine does, it doesn't cause pleasure, but it records pleasure. And it alerts you and arouses you so that something that is really neat, like juice on the tongue, you'll look out for in the future. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So what happened was they did a Pavlov's dog kind of experiment where they paired light or a whistle with the reward. And once the animal learned that it was going to reliably get the juice on the tongue after the light, it started alerting 2 seconds earlier, right? Now there's another slide that I don't show because of time constraints that shows that when they paired that whistle with a light and the animal learned that a light was going to come before the whistle, it moved another 2 seconds back in time. So what this is showing is that all the good stuff like sex and food and water and stuff, the animal has to like pick up cues from its world and figure out when it's going to happen. And fortunately, we are not, just the victims of blind conditioning. We can actually go through the world and acquire new desires and learn new things. And I actually, at this point, like to give a thought experiment. Say you're walking down the street. It's a windy day, and all of a sudden, some $20 bills start blowing by. Or in Europe, it would be 20 euro notes. And without even thinking, you immediately grab from them. This is what the yippies did in the stock market. They got up in the top of the stock market and threw dollar bills down and created pandemonium. People who controlled billions of dollars started reaching for a few dollar bills. Well, this doesn't actually make any sense because you can't eat a dollar bill. You can't drink a dollar bill. You can't have sex with a dollar bill. But a dollar bill can get you all of these things. And so on this simple little experiment of a rat, some juice, and a bell and a whistle, we can confidently erect the entire structure of modern capitalism. Next slide. Okay, now this is a very important slide because this is the dopamine cascade. And you know how serotonin starts with tryptophan? Dopamine starts with something called tyrosine, which is just a food. And it goes through, from the tyrosine, it goes to the, into an intermediate state, L-dopa, basically, the same as cinnamon. And then it's turned into dopamine, and then it's turned into norepinephrine.